Welcome to the Huddle Up Podcast, your go-to show for all things Broncos.
What is good, Broncos country? Welcome in to the Huddle Up Podcast presented by Mile High Huddle. It's time to drop some knowledge, time to have a little bit of fun. I'm your host, Chad Jensen, Scout Media, CBS Sports Digital. With me, as always, is Will Keys, editor and writer at Mile High Huddle. Now, today's episode is brought to you by Audible. Get a free audiobook download and a 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/huddle up. Over 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or MP3 player. Again, that's audibletrial.com/huddle up. The regular listeners of this show know that I'm a big proponent of this app and this service. I'm a big reader, but I don't always have the time with everything, all my responsibilities I got to juggle, to sit down and turn the pages. So it helps to have Audible where whether I'm, working on dinner or I'm out in the yard mowing the lawn or whatever, I can turn on a book and consume it in that way and still get it under my belt. So I'm a big fan of this service. If you like to read, and even if you're not a huge reader, but you need something to help for your commutes or when you go on trips, go to audibletrial.com/huddle up, sign up for the 30-day free trial, choose one of the books from the 180,000 different titles, and see if it fits your life as well. Now, Huddle Up is here to give you a deep dive on your favorite team, the Denver Broncos. We're not here to just report the news, but we need your help. We can't grow without you. And I do want to give some props to those of you who took our call to action last week to heart and took some time to rate and comment on iTunes and Stitcher. Shout out to Mike M., shout out to NHayden27 and all of you who took the time. Much appreciated. You guys have no idea, seriously, how much that helps us. So every listener, we ask that you just take a second, help us out by rating and commenting on the show, whether you use Stitcher or iTunes to listen. Now, make sure you're following the show on Twitter at HuddleUpPod, and that you're subscribing so that each episode is ready and waiting for you, and you're not out there having to search each time we publish. Now, mandatory minicamp and the Broncos' entire off-season training program is in the books. The next 5 weeks leading up to training camp could really suck, but we're going to be here several times each week, whether it's Will and I or Nick and Carl, to find interesting ways to analyze this team to try and figure out what's going to happen in 2017 and how this Denver Broncos team is going to shape up. And you're not going to want to miss a single episode. So the Broncos held their mandatory minicamp, of course, this week, 3 days of practice. And although there was no hitting or full contact, the players did amp up the intensity over what they were putting in during OTAs. So naturally, there was some collateral damage. The injury bug struck. But fortunately, it was nothing major. Second-year defensive lineman Kyle Pecco, unfortunately, did injure his foot in Tuesday's practice. Turns out it was a broken bone in his foot. He's already undergone surgery and is expected to be back the first week or so of training camp. Will, baby Pecco, has been playing the nose behind his cousin Domata and Zach Kerr, but he has the versatility to play anywhere on the D-line. Unfortunately, though, as much as I like him, I'm not sure I see a place for him when it comes down to the roster math on the 53-man roster this year, but he is a guy that I could see factoring into Denver's plans beyond 2017, and at the very least, he's a guy to keep on the practice squad in case the injury bug strikes in season.
Yeah, I think he's kind of a project at the position. He's an undrafted free agent heading into year 2. And so the injury it's never a good time to get hurt. And, it's a good thing that it didn't happen during training camp. And as long as he does get the majority of his second training camp under his belt, I think he should be okay heading into 2017. Camp is so invaluable for players from heading into year 1, year 2, year 3, yep. And then for the veterans, it kind of gets redundant. But so hopefully he's back. Obviously they added Zach Kerr from Indianapolis, and then his cousin Domata Pecco. I think I got that right.
Yeah, Domata. Who knows?
We'll just switch off every time.
Yeah, you say Domata, and I'll say Domata. We're consistent.
Yeah, we're covering all our bases. But I think he's still quality depth. The older cousin Pecco, Domata, he's not going to be around forever. He's been with the Cincinnati Bengals a long time, and he's obviously not the nose tackle of the future in Denver.
Yep.
But the younger Pecco, Kyle Pecco, he's kind of been one of those fringe guys on the roster that floats in between the practice squad and then the active roster. And so even if he does start on the practice squad this year, if it's because of the injury or otherwise, I think he still has a chance to make it to the 53 and make an impact at some point in the year.
Yeah, and he is a guy, like I said, that they're playing him at the nose, but he does have the size and versatility to play anywhere along the defensive line. And how that plays out is in season, if there's an injury on either side of the line at nose, they can call him up and he's ready to rock and roll. Now, there was a situation with Adam Gotsis. I wouldn't call it an injury per se. So as we've discussed many times on the show, Gotsis tore his ACL on Halloween in his final season at Georgia Tech back in 2015. Now, he's fully recovered from that injury, but recently had some pain in his other knee, the non-surgically repaired knee. It got to a point where it was really bugging him, so the team doctors gave it a look-see through an arthroscopic procedure. Turns out there was some debris they found floating around, cleared that up. He's now looking at 6 weeks to return to full health, which puts him back on the field for the first week of training camp, second week on the outset. But I got to say, Will, this one really bummed me out because Gotsis has built up some momentum during the off-season training program. He's rebuilt his body, he's recovered from that ACL tear, and it's allowed him to really shine. We can only hope for his sake and for the team's, I guess, that this knee scope doesn't put the kibosh on that momentum that he's built up.
Yeah, I think for me, it's really just frustrating because you want to see what he can do when he's at 100%, and he hasn't really gotten the chance to show that since his injury at Georgia Tech. But I think as long as he gets, the majority of training camp under his belt, and it's a big training camp heading into year 2, finally being a year removed from that ACL injury. Yep. But I think as long as he is in camp for, 75% of the time, I think he's still got a chance to beat out Jared Crick and start at that defensive end position opposite Derek Wolfe. But it's too bad, and it's frustrating, I guess is the word. It
is frustrating, but there is still, provided he's able to stick to that timetable and that prognosis, he's still got plenty of time to get it back on the field and to try and pick up where he left off. The Broncos really need him. I mean, he's a second-round pick. Second-round picks are going to get a lot more rope, as we know, a lot more opportunity and chances to prove themselves. And even though he's only going into his second year, these injury issues have plagued him. And I'm with you. I want to see him at full health now that he's really developed an NFL body and see what he can do to bolster especially the run defense, because the Broncos have third-down pass rushers in spades. They need guys who can really help set the edge at the point of attack and funnel these rushers back inside and, frankly, also penetrate and make some tackles behind the line of scrimmage.
Yeah, and I think, there are injury issues as far as the long term for Gotsis, and that's kind of the case for anybody who's torn their ACL. But we've seen guys who look like they're going to be injury prone their whole career turn around. And I think you can just look at another example, which is Demaryius Thomas, who is another Georgia Tech Yellow Jacket.
Yeah.
He was, his rookie year, he only played a handful of games, I think. And then when he did play, he was pretty impactful, especially in that Seattle game and then scoring a touchdown over Darrelle Revis in that Jets game. But he really wasn't, full go. He tore his Achilles and heading into that second year. And he wasn't really, 100% until late in that Tebow season. And then we got to see his full potential once Peyton Manning came into town.
Yep.
But he's proof that, even if a guy struggles with injuries, as far as into year 2, there's still plenty of time to turn around. And I think, even if Gotsis is hampered by this a little bit heading into his sophomore season, there's no reason to, hit the panic button and worry about it long term as far as his whole career is concerned.
Absolutely. There were a few other guys the Broncos kept out of practice at times this week with some minor bumps and bruises. Linebacker Brandon Marshall, he had a sore Achilles. Rookie third-round wideout Carlos Henderson had a sore hammy. Other guys who were held out include another rookie, fifth-rounder Isaiah McKenzie, tight end A.J. Derby, veteran receiver Marlon Brown, and then, of course, guys like Matt Paradis, who's still recovering from double hip surgery. For you, Will, do any of these minor bumps and bruises concern you?
I think the only one that actually concerns me is Matt Paradis, just because there's the potential for that to be a chronic issue and kind of linger into the season, kind of like we talked about with Gotsis.
Yeah.
But for Paradis, he's so valuable to the running game. And last year, he was far and away the best player on the Broncos offensive line, and that's kind of been the case probably since halfway through 2015. He's been the most dependable player. He's played every snap since he's got the starting job.
Right.
And you can kind of see that maybe they're a little bit concerned too, because they moved Connor McGovern, who was, I think he was, a fourth or fifth round pick?
Fifth rounder last year.
Yeah, in 2016, they moved him from guard to center. So he's been taking snaps there. They let go of James Ferentz, who was Paradis' backup for the last couple of seasons. So I think they do have a contingency plan for whether or not Paradis is full go kind of at the beginning of training camp, and then if he holds up into the season. But that's the only one that kind of, keeps me up at night.
Right. And it's easy for, I don't want to say armchair analysts, but it's easy to just go, well, Matt Paradis has been the quintessential Iron Man for the Broncos. Hasn't missed a snap since he started, since he began his career as a starter in 2015, played through the hips last year, played through intense pain and discomfort, and still graded out as one of the top centers in the NFL, according to Pro Football Focus. So how could we doubt him getting through this and returning to form? And I understand that, and I feel you if you have that perspective, but a guy coming off double hip surgery, moving into a type of system where you got to have power. It's not so much a lateral game as it was, where you're relying more on your athleticism and quick feet and going lateral under Gary Kubiak's zone blocking scheme. This is a system where it's more about power, moving your guy off his spot, and opening holes on specifically planned for gaps. And so I'm not saying Matt Paradis can't do it, but I'm with you on that, Will, that it is a concern. And it's not that him being out of minicamp was anything new or surprising. I mean, we knew he wasn't going to be available till training camp. But
right.
of all the guys nursing injuries right now, I think he's a guy that also concerns me the most.
Yeah, you really can't have the hips of like an 85-year-old man and then expect to hold up against massive nose tackles in the NFL.
Yep. And
they are moving to a power scheme after 2 years. And, it's really the only scheme that Paradis has played in. He was drafted by the John Fox regime, but his 2 years of starting experience came under Gary Kubiak. So that's another thing to watch to see how he and I guess the other holdovers adjust to the change in philosophy at offensive line.
Yep. And last thing on that, you can also date Paradis' experience in the zone system back to his time at Boise State. Go check some of that tape. It's one of the reasons the Broncos loved him. But another thing we got to talk about real quick before we get to do you buy it. The Broncos waived 2015 7th-round cornerback Torian Nixon this week and signed 6-year veteran cornerback Chris Lewis Harris. So, yeah, we got another Chris Harris on the team, and the waiving of Nixon, to me, at this point in the season, means that the Broncos have truly cut bait. He's done in the orange and blue, and it's a hard knock life, Will. I mean, this came less than 24 hours after Nixon picked off a pass in practice and returned it for a score. And all we can say is happy trails to Torian Nixon. Enjoy that Super Bowl ring you got as a rookie, and I hope that the no-fly zone sizzle that you might have coming out of Denver is going to help you land on your feet.
Yeah, it's really a bummer for Torian Nixon. And then, the other guy that I thought about immediately was Lorenzo Doss, who was, he's another member kind of at the end of the no-fly zone. They got a lot of experience last year, and he was cornerback teammates with Nixon at Tulane, and they both got drafted by the Broncos right at the end of that 2015 season. So they've been together for basically forever. But the move makes a little bit of sense. They bring in Chris Lewis Harris, who was an undrafted free agent, just like Chris Harris, but a year later in 2012, and then played for basically the better part of 5 seasons in Cincinnati. 2 of them came under Vance Joseph when he was the defensive backs coach there.
Right.
And Nixon, he struggled last year. He played in 2 games. They're both games against the Raiders. He got in there with the Aqib Talib injury in that Sunday night game where they lost. Yep. And Derek Carr kind of picked on him. And, you know, it's not often that you see a weakness in Denver's secondary, but you could tell that they were looking to exploit that Talib injury. And, you know, Torian Nixon was kind of on the wrong side of that. Yeah,
I mean, it's unfortunate, but again, it is the hard knock side of life in the NFL. I do think, you know, we don't know. I don't think he's been picked up yet. I haven't been, you know, monitoring the waiver wire per se, but I think he should get another opportunity, at least one more opportunity in the NFL to ply his wares based on his exposure to Joe Woods' philosophies and playing with those no-fly zone dudes. But all right. Now, I want to save the signal caller angle for quarterback watch for later in the show, but I thought it'd be appropriate for us to kind of dissect Vance Joseph's recent remarks about kind of the benefit of OTAs and minicamp and how much or whether they mean anything or have any bearing on the coach's evaluation process. I thought it was interesting, Will. Following the first day of minicamp practices, Coach Joseph said this about how much player performance is actually evaluated during OTAs and minicamp. Here's what he said real quick.
This part, probably 0 to none, guys, to be honest. I mean, it's going to be one on the football field. It's going to be one in the games in preseason. And that's where the evaluation starts, in my opinion.
All right, so I get that the offseason program, especially for a team like the Broncos, with new coaches, putting in new systems, it's primarily about learning. It's primarily about installing the new systems. And I wrote a premium piece about this on Issue on Thursday, but if they were, the OTAs and minicamp, as meaningless as Joseph's coach speak would lead us to believe, NFL teams wouldn't bother with them. So under the do you buy it heading here, Will, do you buy what Joseph is selling? And what value do you see in the offseason training program? Does it impact player evaluation at all in your mind?
I definitely buy what Vance Joseph said. I mean, I think you can tell across the NFL. I know Sean McVay from the Los Angeles Rams canceled the 3rd day of mini camps today. So coaches aren't, you know, too big on them now. You can't really evaluate most of your players until training camp when there's full hitting and they're wearing pads. But there's some value to it too. You know, you have to install a new playbook, which was the case with the Broncos on the offensive side. I think that was one of the main storylines of OTAs and mini camps was how they were faring under Mike McCoy's offense, especially the quarterbacks. And it's also a time to work on technique. Even if you're not hitting, you can learn some new pass rush moves, some new footwork for the quarterbacks. You know, you can really – there's not many positions where you can kind of see how they've progressed from year 2 to 3 or 3 to 4 or whatever. But you can glean a little bit from the quarterbacks. You know, you can see – what's their footwork like? Have they improved their mechanics? Does so-and-so have a quicker release? So it might not be, you know, super valuable as far as evaluating the full 50 or the full 90-man roster.
Right.
But there's a little bit you can tell, especially with the quarterbacks, I think.
See, for me, I'm selling. I'm not buying what Vance Joseph is saying here. Now, on one hand, I get it. Like, I understand that you can't fully evaluate what you have as a team. You can't fully evaluate player performance until you not only get into training camp and the contact begins, but you get into the preseason where there's actual opponents that you haven't been going against on a day in and day out basis with which to compare and contrast and, you know, measure these guys. I get that. But to say that they basically are meaningless when it comes to evaluation, that basically, as he said there, that evaluation starts at training camp in the preseason, I think is not necessarily true. I mean, you look at what's going on with the quarterbacks, you look at what's going on with at any position where there's true competition, you better believe these coaches are paying attention to how these players are responding. They're paying attention to how well they're assimilating the new information, whether it's a playbook or a new technique. how they're fitting in. All these things are being evaluated. And I can promise you that before the coaches sign off and clock out for their 5-week vacation leading up to training camp, there are going to be some conversations about kind of the state of the union, where they sit with this position group, how they liked what's going on over on this group, and that includes the quarterbacks in my mind.
Yeah, I think you actually make a pretty good point, because they're making evaluations all the time. Like literally yesterday when they cut Torian Nixon and signed Chris Lewis-Harris, that's clearly an evaluation.
Right.
They thought that this guy was going to bring more than Nixon did.
Great point.
So I guess, the more I think about it, it is a little bit of coach speak on the part of Vance Joseph to say that they're not evaluating anything whatsoever, which, clearly if you're making roster moves, you're making some type of evaluation, you would think. And
it is coach speak, and I understand that. I mean, he has to pump the brakes each and every time he stood up to the podium. Since he was hired, he's had to field questions about the quarterback competition. So I understand that, they have to kind of keep that storyline at arm's length as well as they can while they are still in the evaluation process. And so it is coach speak. You have to filter through it. You have to interpret it. And through the scope of what we've heard, we'll talk more about that here in a few minutes. But I just think at the end of the day, yeah, it's coach speak. I'm not buying it, but I am looking forward to seeing how things shake out come July.
Absolutely. I mean, I think a little bit of Vance Joseph saying that was to kind of get the media off the scent of that quarterback competition, and maybe they'll ask me about something else for a change.
Right. Yep.
But, that will never happen. We all know that.
Now, quick thing I want to mention. Again, I wrote an in-depth premium piece trying to interpret Joseph's coach speak on Thursday. Now, every week, Mile High Huddle, we save our most analytical content for our premium members, whether it's something a little bit more long-form like that story, or a film review, or something more X's and O's. Nick Kendall, for example, published an awesome film review on Derek Wolf's second highest graded game of 2016, according to Pro Football Focus premium story. Now, if you want to read that kind of content from us, you got to join Mile High Huddle as a premium member. Costs $5 a month, or you can sign up for the year, save $11 annually. But with mini camp kicking off this past week, the CBS, the Scout Brass allowed us to run a sale on premium membership. So until Sunday night, which is June 18th, you can get 3 months of Mile High Huddle Premium for the price of one. So for $5, you'll be locked in on all things Broncos all the way through training camp, the preseason, and into the start of September football. And as a member, you do get some benefits to go along with that, such as 10% off on all sporting tickets, including Broncos, so NFL, NCAA, MLB, NBA, you name it, through Ticket Monster, 10% off, as well as 10% off on Broncos team merchandise through Fanatics. Now, I can't make any official announcements, but I have heard rumblings from up the chain of command that the Fanatics discount for premium members could be increasing this fall. So you could stand to save a lot of money as a fan on merch, like jerseys, hoodies, shirts, hats, stickers, posters, you name it. So anyway, take advantage of this 3-for-1 sale. Go to milehighhuddle.com, click the Join tab in the menu bar, and sign up. But at checkout, just make sure you use the code SUMMER17, and you'll be locked in. We appreciate you. Now let's talk about Bradley Roby for a minute. It's been a while since he's come up, and he's entering his 4th season as a Bronco. Denver did pick up his 5th-year option, so he's going to be in the orange and blue through 2018. Vance Joseph said something interesting about Roby on Thursday following the Broncos' final minicamp practice. Here's what he said.
Roby is a young corner that can be really, really special. He's playing behind 2 Pro Bowl guys, so from time to time, he has to push himself to continue to become what they are. That's tough, because on most teams he would be a starter. So to keep him going mentally and to keep him focused on his future is it's important. He's had a great spring. I mean, his last couple of days has been really, really special.
Now, Roby does have it tough in a certain way. I mean, here he is, an extremely talented and productive corner, playing behind 2 of the best in the game. He's always going to be the number 3 guy on the depth chart, while Aqib Talib and Chris Harris Jr. are both Broncos, barring injury. But Roby should be used to that by now, frankly. As Joseph said there, Roby's had a good offseason, although why should that matter to Vance Joseph? I don't know. It's not training camp or preseason performance. After all, anyway, what I found interesting, Will, is that Joseph has made it a priority, interpreting what he said there, to keep Roby focused on his future. Joseph, a former NFL defensive back himself, he knows players. Do you buy that, though, Will, as an issue for Roby, that the coaches need to, kind of hold his hand to make sure that he stays focused and doesn't become, I guess, kind of despondent behind 2 first-team All-Pros?
No, I mean, I don't really buy it. I think it's mostly when you have guys like Aqib Talib and Chris Harris Jr. in front of you, that should be a luxury, and I think it has been for him in his career. He's always played behind Talib and Harris. He was drafted the same year that they signed Talib in free agency back in 2014. Yep. And so I think part of that has made Bradley Roby the player he is today. And we've seen Roby in situations where, last year, kind of like how Torian Nixon was forced onto the field, Roby was manning that outside spot opposite Harris when Talib was hurt. And he also got picked on a little bit too. He was playing off coverage on, I think it was Amari Cooper, and he got burned a couple of times in pretty big situations. So, until you can say with authority that you are worthy of a starting cornerback spot, I don't think you can really complain too much about having those guys in front of you, kind of taking away all the tough matchups and leaving the third receiver for you.
Yeah, 2016 kind of was a little bit of a step back for Bradley Roby. If you compare it especially to his second season in 2015, where he made so many impact plays, including that huge play in the divisional round of the playoffs where he punched the ball out of, what was his name, Fitzgerald Toussaint?
Yeah, something French like that.
Something like that. Anyway, that the Broncos were down by a touchdown, if I recall right, when that happened, gave the offensive possession, and they were able to capitalize, and that really swung the momentum of that entire game. But he's a corner who has the ability to make those type of game-changing plays. The Broncos obviously believe in him. They see him with a future in Denver. That's why they picked up his 5th-year option. They don't do that with all their first-round picks. Sylvester Williams would be the first one to tell you. So, yeah, Bradley Roby, I don't feel too sorry for him. I mean, as you say, that's a great point, dude. He has benefited for the last 4 years, 3 and some change, of playing behind Aqib Talib, playing behind Chris Harris Jr. I mean, when Talib is gone, at the very least, the things that he'll have learned playing next to him, all these snaps, learning from him, are going to pay some huge dividends down the road.
Yeah, and Talib's he's not going to be there forever. So especially if they re-sign Roby, which I think there's a high chance of that happening after that 5th year, he'll get a shot, and so we'll get to see how he actually fares as a starting corner, because Talib's been in the league since I think 2008.
Yep,
and I don't see him sticking around in Denver for too much longer, maybe a couple of years, but he'll definitely get a shot, and we'll see if he makes good on I guess these few complaints that he's had.
Keep an eye on your future, bro. Just like Coach is telling you, it's going to be okay. Now, it's time for our latest installment of Quarterback Watch, where we break down the open competition between Paxton Lynch and Trevor Siemian. Now, Will, I submit this question to you preemptively. I don't want you to answer it. In fact, just consider it kind of a rhetorical question. In your mind, could it be possible that 3+ weeks of practice has resulted in Lynch and Siemian being, quote-unquote, equal in the competition thus far? Could it be that neither guy has truly separated from the other in any way, even by just like a fraction of an inch? Here's what Coach Joseph said about how the competition has shaped up thus far, where the quarterbacks stand following the final practice of minicamp.
I think my experience on offense, being a QB my entire life, except for 2 or 3 years, it helps me understand all phases of the game. As far as the quarterback deal, I was in a competition in college with Cardell Stewart. It was very similar, to what these two guys are going through. So I get it. It's a tough deal. You have to be patient with the guys. You have to not take the evaluation as a daily deal. It's got to be a full, a collective evaluation as far as the time, it comes to it. It can't be Monday, he's better, Tuesday he's better. It's got to be a collective result as far as, who was more consistent over time.
So collectively, was any guy better over OTAs?
Honestly, not really, because it was more of a learning, phase, of where we are. And, both guys did some good things and both guys did some off things. So it was really equal.
Now, Will, you didn't have to be present to watch all of the Broncos practice sessions that were open to the media to get a feel for where this thing is at right now, in my opinion. You could hear it, you could glean it from the comments that the coaches and players made over the last few weeks. There was more, I think, positive talk about Paxton Lynch than there was about Trevor Siemian. Now, like we touched on, though, last week, that could be because the media and the fans are more fixated on Lynch because he's the first rounder and, they're hanging on every piece of analysis that comes out of the practices and the media sessions. For example, there were significantly more Lynch questions leveled at players and coaches over the last few weeks than Siemian questions. But that doesn't necessarily negate what the guys actually had to say about the issue when they were asked. So, Will, let me just put this out there. I don't buy for a second that the quarterbacks turned in an equal performance over the last few weeks. That being said, let me ask you this. The Broncos are heading into a 5-week vacation before camp kicks off. Based on your own gut, based on your own intuition, which quarterback do you believe at this stage has the most momentum right now? Momentum, of course, being a relative word.
I mean, it's hard to say is the most momentum right now, but I think Paxton Lynch definitely has the easiest track to becoming the starting quarterback based on his pedigree. And then, I think there is some truth to people saying that the Broncos want him to be the starting quarterback. And I don't know if they really are, they're set on we have to have Lynch start because it's year 2 and because he was a first-round pick.
Yeah.
And I don't want to say that they absolutely want him to start more than they want Trevor Siemian to start. But if it is close, they will probably defer to the first-round pick where they made a huge investment. They traded up to get him back in the 2016 draft. But don't sleep on Trevor Siemian quite yet.
Agreed.
We've talked about Paxton Lynch making big strides from year 1 to year 2. But quarterbacks typically take their biggest leap from year 2 to year 3, and you can see that with a lot of quarterbacks in the league right now. You saw that, or maybe not in the league right now, if I was talking about Jay Cutler, who made a huge leap back with the Broncos from year 2 to 3, where
That's true.
Put up 4,000 yards, close to 30 touchdowns in year 3. Look at Matthew Stafford, who went from kind of a middling young quarterback to 5,000 yards, about 40 touchdowns in year 3 in Detroit. And then Derek Carr, we saw him put up an MVP like season. Mm-hmm. And we don't know what he would have done had he not broken his leg, but those are 3 guys that really, really stepped up from year 2 to year 3. And I don't know if you're expecting that type of season from Trevor Siemian if he starts, but I think you can count on some pretty marked improvements if he does win the job.
I don't think the Broncos are going to hand this job to Paxton Lynch by any stretch of the imagination. And so what that means is that he's going to have to beat Trevor Siemian. And to kick that can a little bit farther down the road, that means that Trevor Siemian, he's going to have to screw up. He's going to have to regress in order for Paxton Lynch to beat him out. I mean, Paxton Lynch, we can talk about his ceiling. We can talk about all that. But he still has to get down the nuances of the NFL game, playing quarterback, the type of things that Siemian has mastered, which, frankly, as much as coaches salivate over big playability and a big arm like Lynch has, they are more comforted and find confidence in the type of things that Trevor Siemian excels at. We could talk about, and I wrote about this on Thursday, about, the latest trope about, if you could Frankenstein some football and put Paxton Lynch and Trevor Siemian into one quarterback, you'd have an all-pro. And it's fun to spitball things like that. But Trevor Siemian, honestly, for him to really set himself apart, he's got to do a little bit more than just excel at the little things. He's got to show some more confidence in taking chances downfield. He's got to show a little bit more of a killer instinct and a willingness to step on the opposition's throat, especially when it counts, like on third down and in the red zone, where he really struggled last year as a starter. Paxton Lynch, He's going to do those things. His natural instinct is to push the ball downfield, but he's got to prove that he can keep the offense moving, that he can stay on schedule, that he can keep the offense on the field, and, of course, do the other things like capitalize in the red zone and all that. So both guys have a lot to prove, and I do agree with Vance Joseph in that we're going to learn a lot more about the big picture with both these guys once we get into camp, once we get into the preseason. But I think for now, if I had to, you're listening to this for a reason. My analysis is that coming out of OTAs, coming out of minicamp, Paxton Lynch has got a little bit more momentum that Trevor Siemian has at this point. But
that's fair. Yeah.
That's not an absolute in that it can't change. That's like the OTAs and minicamp represents just a small fraction of the full picture that these coaches are going to take into account before they name that starting quarterback.
That's true, and I think another thing that we have to kind of keep an eye out on is how they adjust to a new scheme, because the Mike McCoy system is pretty vastly different from the scheme that they've been working under Gary Kubiak the last couple of years for Siemian, and then just his rookie year for Lynch. But we talk about how Lynch might be a great fit for the scheme, but I think I brought it up before, but it's not a system that necessarily requires these great skills out of their quarterback. If you look at the guys who performed under the Mike McCoy offense in the last, I don't know, 5 or 6 years, start with Tim Tebow, and I don't know if he's the most physically gifted quarterback, or at least passer. He's a great runner. And then you move on to post-neck injury Peyton Manning, and obviously he wasn't wowing anybody with his arm strength. And then when he got to San Diego, he had Phillip Rivers, who, he's got that wonky release, and he doesn't have a great arm. But those are guys that maybe Tebow excluded, but Manning and Rivers, who have a great understanding of the offense and rely on accuracy and timing to make their offense go. And I think Trevor Siemian can kind of be that guy, and perhaps Lynch to some extent.
That's a good point, dude. Honestly, I think that's something that gets missed, and I'll speak for myself on this. It's not something I take into account as often as I should as a guy who analyzes football, and that is that one of the major factors in how this competition is going to shake out is going to be how each player, how each quarterback acclimates to this new system. And, we've heard, if you look at the evidence so far, Paxton Lynch, who we didn't really expect a whole hell of a lot of in this department because he struggled so much with the system last year, came back to the Broncos headquarters this offseason, impressing people with his knowledge of the playbook. But knowledge is one thing. Actually going out and excelling in the system is another. We know that Trevor Siemian is going to know the playbook. He's going to understand his responsibilities. He's going to understand his reads by and large. He's going to know what to do with the ball before the snap. But executing is another matter as well. So how these guys take to the new system, and again, we'll see that fleshed out more and more to Vance Joseph's point once we get to training camp, once we get to the preseason. But that is going to play a huge role this time around.
Yeah, no, I think that's true, and we'll have to wait until training camp and definitely preseason to get the best look at that against a variety of different defenses. But I wanted to move on to a new segment that we're going to introduce. It's called Over Under. So the first one, minicamp just ended, so it's definitely the dead time of the off season. I'm going to propose an over under to you. So with all of the free time, we got about 5 weeks until training camp starts.
Yeah.
I'm going to set the over-under for player arrests prior to training camp at 1 arrest. Would you like to take the over or the under?
All right, over-under on player arrests. So we're talking Bronco arrests.
Just Denver Broncos, yep.
For the coming 5 weeks leading up to camp.
Also, Aqib Talib's brother does not count.
Okay.
Only Talib.
All right. Good info. Got to know that. You know what? I think everybody's trying to impress a new coaching staff. I think they're going to be minding their P's and Q's. I'm going to take the under on this. I think these guys are going to try and play it safe, play it smart. Keep their nose clean. I'm going to take the under. How about you?
So I'm going to say it's a push. So I'm going to say 1 arrest. And it's not what you think. It's not Aqib Talib, with a gun or anything at a nightclub outside of Dallas. but I'm predicting possibly a hunting or a fishing violation, maybe hunting without a license for Andy Janovich.
Yep.
I think that's, maybe he poaches some type of rare pheasant or,
like a mule deer out of season or something.
Yeah. He tries to hunt some endangered species, but I think that's the most likely scenario in these next 5 weeks. I don't know what's in season or what's not, so I can't really get into the details. But
well, hey, I mean, if they're sticking around the Mile High City, we all know Colorado, the Rockies, home to a lot of bountiful wildlife, all kinds of ways for these guys to get in trouble with firearms and poaching wildlife out there. So certainly an issue to keep an eye on as we get into the dog days of the dead time on the NFL calendar. But hey, before we get out of here, let's take a couple quick questions from the Mile High Mailbag. You guys have questions, and we've got maybe not some answers. We got opinions anyway. We're short on time, so we'll answer them kind of rapid fire. First one comes from @SeanThill. Question, Will. Weakest part of our excellent defense. He puts in parentheses MLB/DT, so middle linebacker, defensive tackle. How and if other parts of the no-fly zone can compensate. So weakest part of our excellent defense, and how or if other parts of the no-fly zone can compensate. You start us off here, Will. What is the weakest part of the Broncos defense?
So I think it's the defensive line opposite, or at least excluding Derek Wolfe. We still don't know who's going to start at defensive end. And then, I don't know if Domata Peko would necessarily be a weakness at nose tackle or whether it's Zach Kerr or whoever. And especially if you get a guy who can produce opposite Wolf at the other defensive end, and I think you saw that in 2015 with Malik Jackson, it kind of renders the nose tackle not irrelevant, but if you just have someone serviceable, the defense is going to be perfectly fine. You don't need a superstar at that position if you have guys on the end doing their job like Jackson and Wolf were. Yeah. And I think we saw, I don't think it is middle linebacker and that's kind of been sort of a narrative that they might need to improve that position. And we saw that they have some confidence in Todd Davis heading into year, I think 4, just because they didn't draft anybody at that position. Fair. And there's a stat that came out about Todd Davis, how he had the highest tackle to missed tackle ratio in the NFL. And I think that says a lot about him as a run defender. And there are definitely ways that he can improve in pass coverage. But I think if you can take that reliability in the run game, you would take that more often than not. And as far as, how the no-fly zone can compensate, I guess, cover for longer, or maybe get a better pass rush and send TJ Ward, Justin Simmons on some safety blitzes. That's really all I can think of.
It's hard for me to it's hard for me to say that there is a weak part of the defense. Let me put it this way. For me, the biggest question marks are on the defensive line. I'll concur with Will on that. The depth is there. I mean, the Broncos this time around have a lot of pieces available to them, which stands in glaring contrast to where they were out this time last year, or at least at training camp when Vance Walker tore his ACL. They lacked and suffered for no depth throughout the season. We saw it result in them going from the 3rd rushing defense in the league to 28th. This time around, they have the pieces there. As you say, Will, I'm just not sure yet how those pieces are going to fit, how the positions are going to resolve. I think I'm pretty confident that, of course, Wolf's going to start. That's a guarantee, health willing.
I would say so.
Peko, I think, is going to be your starter. You could pretty much count on it at nose. And then on the other side, we don't know. So that's my biggest question. Middle linebacker, if things get fixed on the D-line, you're going to see Todd Davis do a lot of good stuff. They're just going to have to come up with an answer on passing downs, coverage. You can't have him on the field covering running backs out of the backfield. But let's move on one more time here. One last question, then we'll get out of here. Comes from our friend Jacob Smith at JSMileHigh9798. His question: how has Vance Joseph adjusted to being the head coach with this very, very talented roster and Elway being so driven? And I'll start this one off, Will. Rapid fire. It's hard to say, really, at this point, but my early estimation is that the 2017 Broncos have been invigorated, if you will, by the arrival of Vance Joseph and his staff. The Broncos seem to be playing with more enthusiasm and passion, especially for this time of the year where you don't see a lot of that from veteran teams. You heard it from several players over the last few weeks. I think that's going to pay big dividends during the season. Joseph's philosophies about being a player's league, being a player's coach, and really shaping things to players' strengths. These are all, it's a breath of fresh air following the dogmatic Gary Kubiak regime. I've been impressed so far, and up to this point, I think John Elway's expectations for a winning ball club could very well be fulfilled by Vance Joseph and company, provided the quarterback situation clarifies. But, Will, what's your answer for Jacob?
Yeah, I think he's done really well so far. He's done a good job handling the media. But I think what he's done best, and that came pretty early in his coaching regime, in the first 100 days, if you will, to use a presidential analogy.
Oh, yeah.
But he's done a good job delegating. He really obviously knows what to do and who to bring in. And he brought in a great staff. He brought in Mike McCoy, obviously, an offensive coordinator. I think he really upgraded the offensive line just by bringing in Jeff Davidson, who's a veteran, used to be an offensive coordinator for the Carolina Panthers. And then he brought in Bill Musgrave to coach the quarterbacks. So I think, one of the biggest responsibilities for a coach is managing your assistant coaches. And if this year is any indication, I think Joseph definitely knows how to delegate. And I think that's going to be one of his strengths going forward.
Yep, and the last thing I'll say on this, and we'll sign off, is great point, because we know that was an issue for Elway in the front office last year. Gary Kubiak could not let it go, dude. He had the way he did things. Not only was he managing the team from the head coach position, but he was involved on the snap-to-snap basis in calling the offense. And when Elway asked him to pump the brakes following his health scare, he tried. But then he's got his way of doing things. He's always done it, so we went back to it. And long story short, the season went off the rails. So that was a big priority from everything I've been told for the front office this time around, and the brain trust that goes about the hiring process, including team president Joe Ellis, was finding guys that were not only willing to delegate, but could do so and do it from a smart position, be savvy at how they delegate. And a lot of that had to do with hiring the right guys.
Right. And he definitely brought in the right guys. Everybody wanted Mike McCoy. Everybody wanted a better offensive line coach. We know what Bill Musgrave has done. We liked Greg Knapp, obviously, and what he had done with developing guys like Trevor Siemian.
Yeah.
But it was probably, it was a time for a change, a new regime. And Vance Joseph, he's not a guy with a big ego, obviously. At least we can tell as far as this offseason's gone. He lets Mike McCoy handle the offense, even though he's got an offensive background playing quarterback for a while. Yep. I think at Colorado. But he mostly keeps to the defense as far as his own area of expertise. He was a defensive backs coach for a while, and then is the defensive coordinator in Miami last season. So he kind of knows where he can pick and choose and say, all right, you're in charge of the offense. Joe Woods, you're in charge of the defense. You have a guy at offensive line. I can kind of handle the big picture, handle the media, take care of the bigger things, and let the details get taken care of by the guys who know how to do it best.
Yeah, I would say humble, Vance Joseph, humble but confident, and he's also clearly improved too in his engagement with the media. He's kind of calmed down and not quite so nervous when he's on the podium. But hey, that's all the time we have for today's show. Follow us on Twitter at HuddleUpPod. You can find Will in the Twitterverse at WillKey6, myself at Chad N. Jensen. Again, tweet us your questions, and we will try to address them as often as we can on the show. Don't forget to subscribe, y'all. For Will, I'm Chad. We'll talk to you soon.
Mile High Huddle.